Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Tokyo on Fire. It is November 30th, 2017. Tomorrow's December. North Korea fires another test rocket that puts all of the United States within range. Michael?
It's been a very interesting last 2 days, let's put it that way.
It's saber-rattling times 10, isn't it?
Well, they certainly have shown a technical capacity that far surpassed what anybody ever thought they would be getting at this point in time. By lofting a rocket up 5,000 kilometers up into space and then bringing it back down, they're showing up a technical capacity that is more than sufficient for putting the United States at risk.
Does this qualify North Korea now as a nuclear state? This is the goal that they have been pursuing.
Well, there was a American scientist who a few years back, actually more than a decade back, he was brought in by the North Koreans, and they wanted to show their nuclear deterrent. And what it was a jar with taper on the top, which was warm. And they said, this has on it plutonium. And he held it, and it was warm. So there was he said that's what it should be what it should feel like. And then they said, well, are you impressed with our nuclear deterrent? He said, that is not a nuclear deterrent. Right. What you need are, and he gave a list. And they've been crossing items off that list ever since. He really shouldn't have been so honest and truthful about what a nuclear deterrent is, because with this last large missile shot that happened just 2 days ago, they're in. They've completed the project that was set down by this American scientist.
So the United States and Japan have been discussing this, haven't they? And wondering what should be their response to the North Korean saber-rattling.
There seems to be two different tracks, and Japan, at least under the Abe government, is nothing but resist, 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 try to box the North Koreans in any way possible, have them pay for what they're doing. The United States seems to have a slightly different, and that's for Japan, a dangerous flexibility in that it's always extending as long. One hand is a fist, but it's also got another hand that's extended, hello, we can talk. If you stop what you're doing, we can have some kind of conversation.
That's worked great in the past.
It's not that it has worked great, it's that you always have to do both if you're a hegemonic power like the United States is, which leaves Japan at a much more radical and much more vehement position. And it could indeed get left behind. This is not the first time the United States has opened the door before Japan was ready for that door to be opened. That happened in '72 with the approach to China. Suddenly, Henry Kissinger and Nixon going to China, and Japan, which had been right alongside the United States, supporting Taiwan, being against the PRC, being left in the dirt. Hey, that's right. The waving goodbye, bye-bye, and then having to play catch-up. Now, Japan did really well in that instance, quickly moving in and becoming indeed China's best friend for those first few years. Is that likely to be repeated in the case of North Korea? And probably the North Koreans would really like that, because they like the size of the checks that Mr. Abe writes for other countries. And that might indeed be their strategy behind all of this. To try to get the United States engaged and then have the Japanese swoop in. But that's really speculative.
Right. Well, speaking of speculative, the hiatus that we have enjoyed since the president visited Japan, actually maybe 2 weeks before the president visited, it's been very quiet for the last, 4 weeks?
Yeah, but the United States did something, well, the Trump administration, with the complete agreement, if not indeed Mr. Abe's suggestion of putting North Korea back on the list of state sponsors of terrorism. Now, that is about as provocative a thing as you could have done, because the North Koreans had worked very, very hard throughout the Bush and Obama administrations to get off that list and stay off that list. To be put back on it is simply to say all of the last 15 years of negotiations, meetings, etc., were for naught. You're back on the list again.
Right.
no kidding, the North Koreans will respond, but they responded in a very forceful way that really changes the dynamics, at least for all of the players on the U.S.-Japan side.
Michael, I came back from the United States just yesterday, and when I was in America, a lot of people asked me about the fear that the Japanese must be feeling about these rockets that are flying over or close to Japan. And my response was, there's not that panic that you might assume there would be, and that's largely because the target of these tests is not ultimately Japan, it's more likely the United States.
That's correct, and I agree with that assessment, and you were right to say it to people over there. Japan has been in range of a missile with a nuclear warhead on it for a very long time. You don't need a fully intercontinental ballistic missile. It's not a continent away. It's not an ocean away. It's just across the Sea of Japan. The East Sea, of course, if you're a Korean. But it's not that distant, and Korea has had those intermediate range missiles for quite some time. So it hasn't changed much for Japan. However, the Abe administration lives and dies by its anti-Korean stances, both toward the South Korean government. I mean, we're seeing, for example, in terms of the spread of comfort women statues through the Korean American or Korean ethnic groups all over the globe, mostly in America right now. And the Abe government saying ultimately that all goes back to the South Korean government and its wishy-washiness on the mutual agreement ending the comfort women dispute. But also in terms of the North Koreans, when Trump was here, he met with the families of the abductees, which is just simply playing to Abe's main base and to his longtime enmity toward the DPRK. That has been the pedestal on which he stood upon in order to become prime minister. So this is perfectly in line with his own political stance and his own political background. Whether it's good for Japan, however, is I think there's a major question there.
Right. One of the other questions I was frequently asked was, why is it that the North Koreans really hate Japan so much? Why can't we just be friends? And why does this thing seem to just escalate? And I think the perspective of history and pre-World War II is kind of lost on a lot of people.
Well, it certainly would be hard for both Kim Jong-un and for Mr. Abe if peace and friendship were to break out between their two countries. Both of them, a lot of their political support and a lot of their most vehement supporters within their own government and also within their people
they harken back.
Are the ones who actually want this to go as far into aggression and into enervation as possible. It really helps. It gets your eye off the ball of economic development, or in the case of both countries, that an aristocracy, a set of princelings, are sitting on the throne. Mr. Abe being the grandson and great-nephew of a prime minister, and also the son of a foreign minister, and Kim Jong-un being the third generation in a communist dictatorship, a dynasty. Having tension between the two countries keeps people's eyes off that and onto, oh yeah, this is a traditional enmity that goes back hundreds of years, blah, 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 blah. Shove that to the side and you see much more clearly, this is really to the political advantage of both sides.
So what are the implications now that they have just test fired, a rocket that could potentially reach all of the United States?
With a warhead on it, yeah.
Right. Where does that put us now?
It puts us in one of two places. That the United States, out of terror, will abandon Japan. That's one of the lines that is played up here. Also, you can see it exactly the opposite. Now that the United States and Japan are in the same boat, i.e. they're both within range, maybe they will work much more closely. Either argument is fine. I prefer the latter one because I really think that as the North Koreans have gone forward, they are getting farther and farther away from their normal way of operating, which is to use the threat of becoming something as a way of extorting money from other people. You know, if you don't pay us money, we'll develop nuclear weapons.
Right.
If you don't pay us money, we'll develop intercontinental ballistic missiles. Well, now that you have them, what are you going to threaten us with, right? Are you going to actually threaten us with nuclear weapons? We're going to destroy you with nuclear fire unless you send money to this particular Swiss bank account. It's never worked. No country
We've tried that before, you and I. Nobody's ever sent us any money.
Yeah, that's right. It is, no country has ever managed to do that ever, and none ever will. Because if you try to extort money with nuclear weapons, you're just saying, I'm ready to start a nuclear war for cash.
Right.
And no country does that.
But also, they've done studies that show that nobody's going to be the winner. Should whoever takes the first step, there's going to be a reaction and then a counter reaction, and nobody's going to win in that scenario.
Nobody's going to win, and certainly the DPRK will lose. It faces in the United States a nuclear response, and it will be a nuclear response to even a conventional attack on Tokyo. That would simply eliminate North Korea from the map of the world. I'm sure they're very much aware of that, but they still have to play up this matter of deterrence. And it is, okay, we have to be fair. For a country that's as isolated as they are, with the population that they have and the low level of economic development, yes, they are threatened by the United States. And for them to develop a deterrent against the U.S., is smart. If you just peel away all the issues of, it's a prison. Yeah, it's a prison state, a human rights hellhole. It is attempted to assassinate, or it has assassinated the cabinet of South Korea back in the 80s. It abducted Japanese. It's an evil place. Okay, fine, evil, fine, but as a state, it wants to protect itself, and it's going to do whatever it needs to do so, especially in an environment where it is a small country facing off against the world's most powerful one.
Right. 3 aircraft carriers are still in the region?
And that also, it simply plays up to the North Korean narrative of saying, we are oppressed, they're out to get us. They have 3 aircraft carriers, they could bomb us to oblivion many times over. We must be able to prepare to counterstrike and deliver a blow that they shall never forget.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Yeah, but that's the rhetoric, and again, it's the simple logic of deterrence. You really want to make sure that anyone who thinks about attacking you will know that they will be badly, badly hurt if they do so. And that again, I applaud them for their realism, if not for nothing else that they do.
Okay, finally, doesn't this kind of play into the Prime Minister's role of building up the self-defense forces, revising the Constitution that restricts them from having an offensive force, and his talk with the President about we're going to be buying billions and billions?
Yeah, it's every one of those 3.
Right?
It's absolutely, that's exactly where it goes. What a terrible thing it would be for Mr. Abe's plans for Article 9 if peace broke out.
Right.
That would be terrible. There would be no reason to alter anything. What am I here for? Oh, I hope it isn't to revive the Japanese economy, because I haven't really done a great job on that. Other people would argue that they say he has. I say, yes, I can buy a lot of prosperity with IOUs too. But it is part and parcel. And having an absolutely shattered relationship with the DPRK is almost necessary to justify a vast change, a regime change, as Mr. Abe calls it, ending the post-war regime in Japan.
You and I haven't had a discussion on this, and maybe we should dedicate Tokyo on Fire to it. But what's wrong with having Japan a powerful state, even a nuclear state, that can project its image and its forces throughout the Pacific region? What's wrong with Japan reasserting itself as that kind of a nation, the kind of nation that other countries have?
I can see that as being, there are 2 stories there. The first is, should Japan or can Japan become a normal nation? There's no reason for that not to happen. If it is indeed the wish of the Japanese people to become a normal nation, there's nothing to stop it, and there's no reason. The nuclear issue is a special one. Japan is the linchpin in the world's non-proliferation regime. If Japan can hold back, despite the fact that it has 44 tons of plutonium, because it was separated from nuclear fuel, and it has big rockets. The H-2 rocket is clearly an intercontinental ballistic missile if you put a warhead on it. If it can be persuaded to not become a nuclear power and to stay not a nuclear power,
it's a torch for everybody else.
It's a torch for everyone else. It says, look, Japan has the capacity, it has the threat, and yet it relies upon the United States and the minimalization of the proliferation of weapons for its own security. The moment Japan goes, the whole world will go nuclear. Every country will have a justification saying, look at what Japan did. They had the U.S. behind them. They didn't trust in that deterrent. We don't trust in any other deterrent except our own. And it's the breakout state. So those are two different issues, I think.
But looking at the United States being separated from Japan as the big brother, as the nuclear umbrella, allows Japan to do many other things that it's been somewhat restricted from pursuing today.
Well, that is so speculative, and the way Japan would behave under what kind of government, based on who would be prime minister. We would be at a point where the personality of the prime minister would matter a great deal in terms of the stance of the state. I mean, we certainly see what the personality of Donald Trump does to the United States as compared to Barack Obama, and its standing in the world. The same would apply for Japan. Japan, because it is constrained, has a very limited up and down that it can undergo with the change in the head of state. It would be, and we should really have a talk about the powers of the prime minister if we can. That would be a huge change, and that would put incredible pressure on internally because of the very twisted and distorted electoral system that we have.
Right. A lot of speculation involved between Michael and I on what happens with the new nuclear force in North Korea. Please stay tuned.